So welcome everybody. I just resumed the slideshow. Welcome to the ABCs of IEPs and 504 plans. My name is Elisa Wittkop. I'm one of the licensed associate counselors here at Mindful Multicultural Counseling. And this is just a little bit of background about different IEP plans and 504 plans, how you can qualify, what the criteria are, the child study team evaluation process, and if needed, filing a complaint or due process as well. So just to get started, I always like to let people know what the governing bodies are that drive the special education services that we see in New Jersey. So we have the New Jersey Administrative Code, the NJAC 6A-14. But the IDEA Act of 2004, the Federal Administrative Code, is the one that delineates how special education services will be distributed amongst kids in districts, in states. And thanks to the IDEA Act, the two main criteria that are needed to qualify for an IEP are they have to have at least one out of 13 different accepted disabilities or diagnoses. We will go into what these are further on. And they also have to prove that the diagnosis or classification that the child has is negatively impacting the child's performance at their school and that it will not improve without intervention of specialized instruction or teaching. I have intentionally put the words negatively and performance in quotations here because in my experience over the last 10 years, how each district defines negatively impacting or a child's performance can be very subjective and different depending on which school district we are talking about, and sometimes even how much money the school district has. So the IDEA Act of 2004, it's going to be a lot of acronym soup, I call it. So there are 6 main principles that the IDEA Act of 2004 provides for specifically. The first one is this idea of individualized education programs, the idea that you can get a specially tailored list of goals and objectives for your child. The second is that each child has a right to a free and appropriate public education. Least restrictive environment. This can be a tricky term to understand sometimes. So if you have any questions after I explain it, let me know. So least restrictive environment means that your child has the right to be educated in a classroom with the least restrictions and the most tools as they can handle. Sometimes this is the difference between a mainstream classroom, which is a regular education classroom for a child, or a special education or a self-contained classroom. Sometimes there is sharing of specials, sometimes there's not. Or it can be a difference between looking at a hospital setting or a private institution setting, depending on the level of disability or dysfunction. So it also provides for funding for appropriate evaluations and early intervention programs. This has been really key. It lists procedural safeguards and protections for children with disabilities. And the most important part for our topic tonight, it allows for the parent or the guardian and teacher involvement in communication. This is where the child study team comes in. This is where you guys come in. So different reasons a child could qualify for an IEP or a 504. They are having academic deficits, whether they are sudden or they're gradual in onset, if they are not meeting the standards for other children in the same age group, that could be a reason that they could get qualified. If there are any speech delays or deficits, meaning others like teachers or children in the classroom have a difficult time understanding what they are saying when they are speaking. And it's not through any intent or silliness on the child's behalf. There can also be evidence of other pronunciation difficulties or tongue thrusting issues. If there's any fine or gross motor skills deficits, this is where occupational therapy services would come in. And a younger child or an elementary school child can qualify for fine or gross motor skills and OT services for things such as difficulty with correct pencil grasping, scissor grasping, correct cutting skills, the ability to tie knots and laces with like 70% reliability, or even tracing and copying skills. And also, of course, they can qualify if there is a mental health or a medical diagnosis. And the IDEA Act lists 13 pre-covered disabilities that we're going to go over. All right, here's the big 13. A lot of acronym soup. So these are the 13 that are covered by the IDEA Act of 2004 as far as listed disabilities or health impairments. The first one is specific learning disability. That's your dyslexia or your dysgraphia. Otherwise, health impaired or impairment. I'm not sure why, but that's what they will lump ADHD under. It is considered an otherwise health impairment classification in the school setting. Autism spectrum disorder, emotional disturbance, oppositional defiant disorder, if there's any history of depression or an anxiety disorder. If there's any speech or language impairments, stuttering, pronunciation difficulties, difficulty with others understanding what they're saying. Visual impairment is defined as blindness. Deafness was defined as qualifying as legally deaf, even with hearing aids or implements. And hearing impaired was defined as not covered under deafness, but still disrupts their auditory or language processing. So they have hearing difficulties, but it doesn't rise to the level of being fully legally deaf. But without assistance, they are not able to hear or process and understand the lessons as they're being given to them. If there is deaf and blindness combined, if there's an orthopedic impairment or an intellectual disability, a traumatic brain injury, or they are multiply disabled, meaning they have one or more of these present. Does anyone have any questions about any of this so far? Okay, I know I'm throwing a lot of material out, so I will try to check in. So talking about plan transparency, let's define the terms. Nope, I'm gonna go back. So an IEP is an individualized education plan. I call them, well, they are a living, breathing document. And what I mean by it being a living, breathing document is that they are always changeable and always able to be adjusted. There is an annual 1-year review period. It typically occurs in May or June of every year, where things will be reviewed. However, if you have concerns 3 months into the school year and you think that services need to be implemented or are no longer needed, like, nah, their speech is great, I don't think they need it anymore. You don't have to wait until the annual review period comes up. You can put in a written request and you can have it changed before then. They consist of specific goals for improving the academic performance, academics with IEPs. They have objectives that target how they are going to specifically work on each of the goals. At the bottom of the IEP should always be a plan legend. I actually brought one. So without showing you too much of my son's information, this is the plan legend that exists at the bottom of his IEP. Not sure if you can see it, but it will say A, achieved, progressing satisfactorily is PS, PG, progressing gradually. They should all have a key or a legend like that at the bottom that says what the code's for when you're going through the IEP. So a 504 plan. The big difference between the 504 and the IEP is that the 504 is given more for a child's behavioral health than it is for their academic performance. Academic performance or academic deficits are typically covered with an IEP. A 504 plan is when a child is still struggling in school in other ways, but academically. So we know they need assistance, but their grades are good. That's when the 504 plan comes into play. It is typically less restrictive, and it's also a living document in that you don't have to wait for the annual review period. You can make changes at any time. So I know I already said it a little bit, but the main difference between IEPs and 504 plans, the big one, emotional and behavioral difficulties and dysfunction are present with the child without significant academic deficits. The IEP plan only targets goals that include academics for a child's performance. The 504 plan can cover behavioral difficulties or mental health diagnoses. And they can qualify for a 504 plan without evidence of academic struggle if they are displaying any of these behaviors in school. So if they have difficulty transitioning between classes, if there's frequent crying spells, oppositional outbursts like school or work refusal without benefit of an oppositional defiant disorder, right, a diagnosis, if they elope or run away from school or property without staff, if they make threats to harm others or theirself, either verbal or written, if they display inappropriate boundaries with peers or staff or both. This can include fighting or unwanted personal touching. If there's any presence of anxiety or panic attacks, or anxiety and panic enough that it disrupts the child's ability to stay in class and learn, either witnessed by the child themselves or, witnessed by a staff member or self-reported by the child themselves. Meaning, I didn't make it to any of my classes today because I spent all morning hiding and crying in the girls' bathroom. That would be really any behavior that causes a child to spend more time outside of the classroom than inside the classroom. So requesting an IEP or a 504, who can make a referral for evaluation for services? So you, the parent or the guardian, you can request, you can put a written referral in requesting an evaluation for your child. If you're a foster parent, I would coordinate that with the DCP&P caseworker, since they are technically the legal guardians when they are in your care, even though you are the foster parent. A lot of this will have to be guided or done with the DCP caseworker. If you're a school personnel, staff, counselors, administrators, or teachers, anyone that notices disruption to learning or dysfunction or difficulties with behavior can say, hey, I think we should evaluate this kid. I think they might need help. Any outside agencies concerned with the safety or the welfare of a child, the New Jersey Department of Education, attendance boards, DCP&P, like I said, or early intervention service providers. If your child is 3, 4, 5, and they are getting ready to age out of early intervention and ready to age into school-based services, early intervention will submit a letter of referral to the school and give you a copy requesting that the child continue with speech or OT or other academic services. And here we go. Whoa. Now I'm going to introduce you to the child study team. The child study team. This includes you. You are the leader of this team. I can't ever stress this enough to parents. When you go into these meetings, it can be very stress-inducing because oftentimes it is just you and a room full of people that are like sitting around a table staring at you. And sometimes they can come across like they think they know your child or know more about your child than you do. Never let them forget that you are the expert in your child. Nobody knows more about your child than you do. Typically, it can also include the child themselves in the meeting, depending on what age they are. I see this more in middle school or high school. They will include the child with certain things in the IEP meeting. It gives it an extra level of reliability, I think. Whoever the case manager is would be there, the school psychologist or a school counselor. Sometimes a general education teacher, a special education teacher, or both can be present. The school psychologist. Oh, the screen is blocking that. Oh, and if there is a nurse, if the child has any medical concerns, if there is any medication that is taken from at the school during the day by the child, a nurse could also be present. So some of the topics that are covered in a child study team meeting. The decisions about the child's educational needs and the potential timeline benchmarks for the goals and objectives for their improvement. That's the big stuff that's always covered. So this is going to include identification. That's the immediate decision after receiving a written referral from you or from school about whether or not to evaluate. It may or may not include teacher or staff interviews or feedback to determine whether or not identification is necessary or not. The next part is evaluation. The evaluation part consists of figuring out the nature and scope of the assessments that they're going to do. So we've decided, yes, there is dysfunction. This child is struggling academically, behaviorally, or both. So we're going to evaluate them in order to see the severity of the problem. So that's the nature and scope of the assessments. That's them looking at, is a speech evaluation required? Or do they not have speech difficulties? Should we not consider that? Do they need an OT evaluation instead? Are there finer gross motor skills present that the teachers are seeing? If not, maybe not. Now, the re-evaluation of these initial assessments that they do to determine whether they get the first IEP or 504, those re-evaluation assessments are done every 3 years, not annually, every 3 years. You can choose, if you like to waive when the 3-year assessment period comes up, the re-evaluation, or you cannot. Classification and diagnosis. This is when we have determined after the assessments are done that yes, there is a level of need here based on the assessments, and the child is eligible for services. And you can provide, okay, so you either get classification or diagnosis from the evaluations that the school does. However, if there is already an outside provider that you're working with, if your child already has seen a doctor or a psychiatrist and has a current diagnosis of ADHD or ASD or dyslexia, you can provide that letter or copy of diagnostic history to the school in lieu of them evaluating for a specific diagnosis. So if we all know the child has ADHD, they can do a classification at the school themselves, or you can provide an outside diagnostic letter of proof. After the classification and diagnosis is made and they determine what services they do need, like speech or OT and other things, that's when they work on the development of the goals and the objectives for the IEP. This is when it goes to the individualized education programming part. This is a whole team, you included, looking at different goals areas needed of improvement, and objectives and timeline benchmarks for when they plan to see progress or when they plan to see overall improvement. I don't know why the bottom thing is covering up. All right. How to make a referral for an evaluation. Who do you contact? So the school district in which you reside. I have information on one of the end pages about who to contact in Ewing District because that's where we are. But you would contact the school district. You would put it in writing, any special education needs or concerns that you already have, and you would submit it either to the school principal, director of special education for the district, the school child study team supervisor, or the school case manager, or a school psychologist or social worker. Once you've submitted a referral or a request for an evaluation to be performed, they have 20 days to decide whether or not an evaluation is warranted or needed. So it's 20 days from the time that you submit a letter or an email saying, hey, my kid is struggling. I think my kid needs to be evaluated for services. They have 20 days to respond to you back about whether they agree with you. Yes, this child does need services. You're right. There is dysfunction or difficulty present. Or two, no, we disagree. We don't think this child needs an IEP plan or a 504 plan. If they do agree that evaluation is necessary, which I will say oftentimes, even if there is mild dysfunction, they will usually, the child study team will agree to evaluate and assess, even if it does not end with them qualifying for an IEP or 504. But if it is agreed upon, it'll be outlined in writing what, if any, types of testing and assessments would be performed. That again goes back to, are we doing speech? Are we doing OT? There will be a social worker evaluation as well, and a psychology portion. So some of the benefits of diagnosis and getting services. Diagnosis can be so scary. I know when my son was first diagnosed, he was a year old with autism, and I think I was half in denial, half petrified. I was very lucky that I was able to get him diagnosed so early, so that when he completed his early intervention, it was early intervention who submitted on my son's behalf the letter of referral for continuation of assessments and services. So diagnosis is scary, but it leads to access for appropriate services. You can't get the services, unfortunately, without the diagnosis. It's a strength-based approach. The IEP, if you read through them, it is always first focusing on what your child does well and what they are good at, instead of just listing what they are struggling with. So it should have a strength-based approach, and it should include what they're good at and list areas of measurable goals for improvement areas. So an example of a measurable goal. Karen will improve pronunciation of TH and TR sounds 5 out of 10 times during independent or group speech therapy in the next 3 months. So it tells you the frequency, the change that you want to see from 5 times to 10 times. How often? Once a week, 2 times a week are they getting speech? 3 times a week? And in how many months or timeline calendar-wise? Do we hope to see this improvement this many times a week in 3 months, 6 months, or an academic year? They are all very specific and measurable. And if they are not, they should be. Early intervention and IEP or 504 intervention services. We know from research that the earlier we intervene, the higher the likelihood of success is, and that's measured by high school completion rates. what it does, diagnosis as well, is it invites everyone on the child study team to become fully informed of the child's needs and limitations. Oftentimes, what I will hear from parents or teachers, even before meeting with a child or their initial child study team meeting, is that they just don't understand what's going on with this kid, especially if it's an emotional or mental health issue. A lot of teachers are not trained how to spot these things or how to intervene all of the time. So when they are invited to become a part of the child study team, the teachers that are working with your child are involved in looking at their diagnosis and looking at the assessments that say, this is what the kid struggles with. This is what they do really well. It erases all of that ambiguity of, why is this kid struggling? Why is this kid acting this way? Because now they are inundated with assessments and research and paperwork saying, this is why they're doing this. This is what we're going to do to help. It dictates specific actions and roles that each member of the child study team will be responsible for. So everyone has their objectives and their task, and it's listed on the IEP or the 504 plan. But you can't get any of those things without diagnosis. So, like I said before, we're in Ewing Township, so the information that I have up here is for how to file a complaint at the state or district level, that is, for New Jersey, for Ewing Township. On the last page, I have information about how to file a federal complaint if you want. So for Ewing Township, middle school to high school, you would send a letter of referral or a letter to complaint or a letter of complaint to Mr. David Hauserman, and his information is up top. If it's pre-K, like early intervention services in the schools up to grade 5 elementary, whether it's Antile, Lore, or Parkway Elementary School, you would want to reach out to Miss Maria Petsos. In my experience, Maria Petsos and David Hauserman are very good at being responsive. They are highly responsive, if not always right when you want, because they are very busy. They will respond. If you have a district level complaint, Director of Special Services and Operations, Mr. Harry Louth, he is highly responsive. I have sent him emails with concerns in the past and gotten immediate responses. I was pleasantly surprised. If you have a state level complaint about whether they are implementing the IEP or the 504 correctly, if you feel like they are not assessing your child properly, if you feel like they are not considering all of your child's difficulties and the full picture from a holistic point of view, that's when I would go to state level complaint. And I would go right past dealing with the district level, the township level, and go straight to the state. So for my parents that have children in Trenton Public Schools, sometimes historically, it has been a really tough battle for even me to try to get onto the child study team, to be a part of it, and to try to get child study team members in certain schools in Trenton area public schools to implement or even assess the way that they should. Not all school districts, in my experience, are like this. Some of them are really great and they will assess and they will classify. Some of them, like Hopewell Township, in my experience, I have seen kids get IEPs and 504s without benefit of classification or diagnosis. So I find that it really can depend on what school district you are in, and again, how they're defining performance. So voluntary mediation. What do you do when you and the school disagree? If there are disagreements about decisions about whether or not to give an IEP or 504 plan, whether or not they want to identify or classify or even evaluate, Disagreements in decisions about the actual classification or diagnosis. No, I disagree with what your assessment says. I think my child has this. If you disagree with the academic placement that they get as a result of the assessments and IEP or 504, or if you feel like the free, appropriate public education within the school district is not being honored. The first step would be to submit a written request for mediation. If there's a disagreement, you want to have, they would like you to go through a due process hearing first. And the idea is that you submit a letter to the school district and to the child study team representatives and the state itself, that there are solutions being sought, or what specifically the disagreements are and how classification has been made or how they want to implement services. The specific details of whatever the disagreement are has to be sent, and proof that it's been sent to the school district has to be offered. But then it should be scheduled within 15 days of the written request. Now, at the due process hearing, it will be you, a child study team representative or member, maybe one you're familiar with, maybe not, and a third-party mediator. The idea is that they want you to try to work out any disagreements and maybe come up with a solution or an alternative that makes both parties happy and ultimately gets the child the services that they need. However, if you as the parent feel like after the due process hearing or the mediation is over that it was not successful, that they are still not hearing your child, then I would go for full voluntary mediation. You tried the due process, it didn't work. We're going to submit a letter of request to this office here. Director of Office of Special Education Policy and Dispute Resolution. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. So we're at the end, and I just thought that I would put in these two flyers at the end, because although this information is really outdated, it's from 2015 and 2016, and it was published in 2017. It gives a really nice screenshot of why this is so necessary, why these children can't be left behind, and why IEPs and 504s are so necessary and beneficial. So in New Jersey, students receiving special education made up at the time 11.8% of the school age population. 20% of the children that qualified for an IEP did so under otherwise health impaired or ADHD. Here's the stuff that makes me the most sad, but is also the biggest reason why I think classification is necessary, diagnosis is necessary. It is long been known that students with disabilities are twice as likely to be suspended or given other disciplinary actions or consequences in school than those who do not have disabilities. Without that prior diagnosis or classification or IEP on board, a child that engages in an action or a behavior that could lead to them being suspended will be done without considering their diagnosis or their mental health limitations or dysfunctions. When an IEP or a 504 is in place and this child has a diagnosis, if they engage in a behavior that is likely to get them suspended, either in school or out of school, the IEP and the 504 plan legally has to be taken into consideration when they are considering the consequences. They are not allowed to consider consequencing the child the same way that they would a child that did not have disabilities, but only because that they have that IEP. So if your child has ADHD, but it's not on record at the school, and they get into a fight, You can't then say, well, they're impulsive. They have ADHD. Of course, they threatened to punch him. We don't have that on file. How do I know your child has ADHD? If there is already an IEP or 504 plan in place, and we can say, hey, this kid has social phobia. Of course, they didn't attend any of their classes that day. They were crying in the bathroom. We can't then hold them accountable or give them disciplinary actions for skipping classes if they were in school in the bathroom dysfunctional and crying. When they have the diagnosis and the plan in hand, it gives them a level of legitimacy that the school cannot legally ignore. So that is all I have for now. That was a lot of information. You guys have been so patient with my rambling. Do either of you have any questions that I can try to answer before we end?
Can you just give an example of when you were talking about the complaints that you would file on different levels, like what would constitute like state versus like an example, what would be kind of something that you might go
Wonderful.
to if I'm making sense?
Yeah. So if I had a concern with how a staff member, so if my son didn't do well with his speech therapist, for whatever reason, maybe the therapist is wonderful, but it's just not a good fit for the two of them, I can write a letter to the case manager at school level complaint, and say, hey, this person does not jive with my kid. They are not getting anything out of services with them. We need to get another speech therapist. Usually, if it's a matter of just switching to a different therapist already on staff, it's easily addressed. It's just a matter of switching the child to a different caseload. If you have concerns that they are not assessing or they are denying a need for assessment, or if they do assess and they classify him with autism and you don't think it was autism, you think it was ADHD. If you are disagreeing with the school, then you can go to state level. If it's a matter of, okay, they tried, but they're still not listening and they're not budging, now I'm going to go to the state. But if you have an issue with the state responding on time, or if the way the state is taking care of delineating federal funding, there are some states that like to take in the federal funding that they get for kids that have IEPs, but it doesn't always trickle down to all the departments it should go to. If you have concerns that your child's school doesn't have the tools that they need, if they need more OT resources or more funding for materials or specific types of medical equipment that your child needs to attend school, then I would go to state level. If all else fails, then it's like the Supreme Court. Then it's like, nope, I'm going right to the federal government, right to the IDEA Act, and I'm going to hold them accountable. Did that make sense, Stacy?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm Riley.
Nice to see you, Riley.
We're learning stuff for you, buddy. Okay.
Oh, that's
Thank
so
you.
great. Well, it was so great getting to meet with you guys, and I hope that you found the information helpful, and it'll be posted on the website, I think, when it's done. So if you need to watch it again, or if you know somebody that could benefit from the information, please feel free to share it. All right. Bye, Stacy. It was nice meeting with you. Bye, Riley.